Joining me this time via Skype from Washington, D.C. is National Security Analyst for the Independent Women's Forum, Amber Barno. Amber, welcome back. How you doing?
Good, Rick. It's great to be back.
All right, Amber, unfortunately, there's a lot in the news right now as it relates to national security and international events. Let's begin with what's happening, what has happened and continues to transpire with the downed Malaysian airliner. Now we find out that obviously fury is growing as pro-Russian rebels are blocking access to the downed airliner site. What on earth could they possibly have to gain or try to be hiding by blocking access to the site?
Well, I think their ultimate goal is to cover up the evidence that proves that these Russian separatists shot down the MH17 Malaysian flight that killed almost 300 people. Whether or not it was intentional or not, all evidence points to them. Even Secretary of State John Kerry came out on the Sunday show saying that there is no doubt that it was Russian separatists that received equipment from Russia, the training from Russia, and all sort of assets and funding from Russia. And there had been multiple cargo planes shot down in the week prior, and all evidence shows that it was these Russian separatists. So I think that as the investigation teams come in, sort of these shoot-down teams to figure out what's going on, they have already been said that they've been intimidating the investigators and they're moving the bodies and not cooperating.
Now, let me ask you this, Amber. There are those, Putin is trying to say, it's Ukraine shot the plane down. There are some that believe that could be the case. I don't believe that's the case from everything I'm hearing and seeing and listening to your expert input. But let me play devil's advocate for a moment. There was this audio which came out of the Russian separatist talking on the phone. We just downed an airliner. Oh, it was civilian. Oh, we made a mistake. You know which audio I'm referring to. How could it be that Ukrainian officials, Western officials, were able to get such a clear, concise, precise audio of Russian resistance, of Russian rebels talking about just downing the jetliner? A lot of people feel that was staged.
Well, I think that there's two options there. One is just sloppiness. These are proxy sort of insurgency type fighters. And then the other option is that, just like you mentioned, it was intentional, that they sort of released this audio for everyone to hear, especially those in Ukraine, because they did think originally that it was a Ukrainian cargo military plane. And it was sort of that they were basically bragging that they had shot down another plane until they realized that it was then civilian.
Right. Okay. British Prime Minister Cameron is likening current events to the appeasement of Hitler in the 1930s. Would you agree with that?
I think that Putin is calling the shots right now. I think that Putin, he quickly started with the blame game, blaming it back on Ukraine and saying if they wouldn't have reinstigated the fighting with the Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine, this plane never would have been shot down. But I think that he knows that he is not threatened by he's not threatened by President Obama or the administration or any of their strong words that have come out after this plane was shot down, and he knows that he is essentially going to get away with this. There are the smaller European countries who are furious, and rightfully so, but I think that Putin knows that he is not going to receive much resistance from this. I think if he knew what was good for him, though, he would come forward and he would say, look, the Russian separatists, which who knows if he'll be distancing himself from in the near future or not. It was a mistake. They thought it was a cargo plane. They thought they were shooting down a military plane, basically to just give some reason behind those actions, because it looks much worse when his own proxy fighters in eastern Ukraine shot down a civilian aircraft.
No, you're right. He has no fear, Amber Barno. It's like Rush Limbaugh said, I want to give credit where credit is due. What we have here is a KGB official versus the former community organizer. It's no contest. It's like, you know, the Super Bowl winner against a high school JV team. There is no contest here. But you said something very, very interesting. I want to come right back to it. You said, if Putin knows what's good for him, and then you went on, that implies there are strong repercussions here to his actions. What did you mean by if he knows what is good for him?
Well, unfortunately, as we heard President Obama speak today on the situation that's going on from the downed aircraft, he basically said we're going to continue tightening sanctions, and if Russia doesn't sort of get in line, then they're going to continue to see themselves being excluded from the rest of the world and isolated. And that, to me, just goes to show that, we all know that foreign policy is not this administration's strong point, but it just goes to show that Russia doesn't care. Putin has no desire to be friends with all of these other nations around the world. He's working with Iran, he's working with Iraq, he's supplying weapons to Syria. He has connections all around the world. He is no longer concerned whether these Western nations in the United States say, oh, we're going to continue to further isolate you.
Right.
That no longer has an effect on Putin.
It's no effect. And a couple other lessons I want to point out to our viewers here. The world is a fragile place. We're witnessing that right now. And America is the glue which holds the free world together, the democratic world together. And we're seeing what happens when that glue is not where it should be. I've often said, Amber, I know I'm getting a little bit getting on top of a soapbox here a little bit. I've said over and over and over again, I make it a theme of this show, that when America pulls back its military influence, I'm not saying we should be everywhere at all times, 24/7, but when we pull back our influence militarily, we should ask ourselves, who then do we want to fill the vacuum which we create by pulling back, because it will be filled by someone. And that should be the question asked before we pull back. And we're watching Putin fill that vacuum right now, as sloppy as it may be.
Absolutely. We have a military for a reason, and it's to ensure that we secure our national interests around the world. And if it does so threaten those, we can't be too timid to use military when the situation arises. Just like you mentioned, not every situation calls for it, but when it does, we can't have a nation and an administration that is so terrified of bringing up that course of action.
All right, Amber Barno from the Independent Women's Forum, thank you for joining us.